Boom, welcome back ladies and gentlemen for another YouTube video. Allincrypto here, and today we are going to be talking about Polkadot, and we are specifically going to be talking about the year 2024 and why it could be an absolutely massive year for Polkadot and its entire ecosystem. I am of course referring to the proposed vision, the proposed new vision and new kind of direction that Polkadot may be going in, as it was laid out by Gavin Wood at Polkadot Decoded 2023. In this video, we are going to be revisiting that proposal or idea that was put forward in regards to Polkadot's future by Gavin Wood at the event. And we're going to be trying to explain it in as simple terms as we possibly can. So the best place for me to start before we actually dive into what Gavin Wood had to say at Polkadot Decoded 2023 about this new lease of life, I guess you could say, for Polkadot, where it's going from this parachain, rather rigid and not a very accessible model, to a more accessible, inclusive, and all around, in my opinion, more useful future that Polkadot may be about to embark on. Now, it's very important for me to absolutely state this, that this is still a proposal. And ultimately, Polkadot 2.0, which is going to go from parachains to kind of block space as a service, core time as a service. You know, you want to think about Polkadot as this kind of computer with loads of different cores in it. It can scale almost infinitely, essentially, depending on the amount of cores that it has. You really want to... It's really important for me to kind of stress the fact that this is still a proposal. So this has to be voted on by you guys, by the community, by the fellowship, and actually get through that process. But I'm pretty sure that it will, because essentially what's being proposed when implemented is actually going to make Polkadot an absolute powerhouse and really a chain of unlimited potential. You know, right now there's a real barrier with parachains. You need to raise funds, you need to win auctions. Not anybody can build on it. What the new proposal essentially is doing, probably most importantly, is breaking down that barriers and opening up Polkadot for everybody. Gavin Wood talks about tinkerers and how they'll be able to now use Polkadot and try things out. And actually, if we look at the internet, often it wasn't people that were perhaps early on the internet and knew everything about it that made the killer applications, but it was entrepreneurs. And once the internet became accessible for everybody, they facilitated these killer use cases that blew the entire internet up. I think 2024 could see a similar thing happen to Polkadot. So let's first start off by looking at Polkadot as it currently sits with the parachain model, and let's give our own little summary, and then we'll dive into some comments from Gavin Wood in regards to the new lease of life Polkadot may be looking to take. So let's get straight into that. You will notice that on Polkadot's website, this is not quite what we are used to, and it says the block space ecosystem for boundless innovation. And this, of course, has came after Gavin Wood's proposal. If we look at Polkadot as it currently sits, this is Polkadot with its parachain model. Now, where parachains essentially come from is this idea of parallel chains running and being secured alongside the relay chain. So this is the relay chain in the middle, and these are the parachains on the periphery of the relay chain. And as Polkadot sits right now, there are around about 50, I think it's 48 parachains. I believe actually a couple were won just the other day. Many of them have already been running for 2 years, and it's been nothing short of a huge success. But in order for you to essentially build and use Polkadot as it sits today, from a building point of view, you need to essentially win a parachain slot. This excludes a large part of the developer market and a large part of entrepreneurs that would like to actually use and utilize Polkadot's amazing infrastructure and really harness the full power of Polkadot. So Polkadot is essentially moving away from this parachain model. Don't worry if you're a fan of many of the parachains like I am. They are largely going to be unaffected. In fact, there's actually going to be improvements likely given to them as a result of this. You know, there's going to be a lot more flexibility. Essentially, what's going to happen is you're going to move away from this parachain model almost to kind of the parathread proposal, which is this more pay-as-you-go model that's based on core time or block space as it is, where you'll essentially be able to rent, pay as you go, and use the Polkadot network. This is extremely exciting and ultimately breaks down a lot of the barriers that Polkadot currently has. Let's dive into Gavin Wood, perhaps going into this.
So what's this new perspective and how is it relevant? Well, the first thing is, Polkadot is, what we have built isn't so much about chains, it's more about space. It's more about the underlying resources that chains need in order for us to deliver this kind of this parachains kind of chatting to each other system. It's also important to understand that Polkadot is ultimately a platform for people to build applications, for users to use those applications. It's not a platform to host, like fundamentally speaking, it's not a platform to host chains. Chains happen to be one of the ways that we get to how Polkadot is useful, but perhaps not the only way. And it's also very crucially resilient. I use the term unstoppable has been sort of bandied about a lot in this industry. I think, not without reason.
If we just take a second to kind of break down what was said there, it might seem a bit confusing. Right now, we know this kind of chain model where chains are essentially the way right now that we facilitate use cases on Polkadot. However, fundamentally, Polkadot is meant to facilitate everything. This idea of Web3, if you think about the internet, anybody can build on the internet. Right now with Polkadot, that's not quite the case. And Polkadot is trying to be the internet, but this kind of Web3 decentralized version. It's trying to be almost more than the internet. It's trying to basically be a global decentralized system that allows everybody and anybody to basically build on it. Right now with the parachains, that isn't currently the case. Parachains are a great kind of way that we've proved that Polkadot can be useful and can facilitate many different use cases. So there's no disrespect being thrown here, I don't think, by Gavin to chains. It's just currently the current model that we have. And really what this is all about is about expanding Polkadot's horizons and actually not just having chains like we currently have, but they are going to be an integral part. Lots of the parachains that we have are currently working on killer use cases, but actually opening it up to anybody and everybody. Let's continue.
So what is, if we look at Polkadot in a much more general sense, what is it? Well, it's a provider of very resilient, general purpose computation. And I say continuation computation, a bit technical, but it's basically like it's not that you have a job and you do the job and then it's done, right? What we actually want to do is have a sort of broad, long-running task that can sort of do some stuff and then kind of pause for a bit and then maybe do some more stuff later on. Broadly speaking, continuations. And in this sense, I'm going to dive back into, I don't know when it was, 2015, 2016, when I sort of had this world computer language. It's a bit like that. I think it's time to sort of reconsider Polkadot in these terms. If we do reconsider it in these terms, how can we look at Polkadot? Well, it's a computer. Like a modern machine. It's a multi-core computer. It's not single core anymore. We now have many different cores. They all operate at the same time, doing different stuff. So far, so good. And it turns out that in this model, blockchains that sort of operate on a core are called parachains. In fact, more specifically, blockchains that kind of have a reserved core to continuously operate on, they're called parachains. All right. So now we understand parachains within this new perspective, this new paradigm. Let's think a bit more about the Polkadot computer. Well, the Polkadot computer, supercomputer, I mean, it's more powerful than a regular computer, probably. It has around 50 cores at the moment. These cores are continuously operating, continuously running, and they're all independent of each other. So they're all going in parallel. Now, having done some benchmarking, have an idea for optimizations, and over the course of a few years, models suggest that this can go quite substantially, well into the hundreds. So when we think about what Polkadot is delivering in these terms, it does start to feel more like a serious computational resource.
To quickly butt in there and chime in, right now we have 50-ish cores, 50-ish parachains that currently occupy those cores. But if you saw the screen that Gavin Wood had on behind him there, in regards to their models, it says 100 or 500 to 1,000 cores potential. So this is why Polkadot's model is so genius, because with many of, the main thing that attracted me to Polkadot really was this new way of doing blockchain. Up until really Polkadot and many other projects have gone in that way. We had this idea of just this layer one that did everything, and everything took place on the layer one. Polkadot said, actually, no, we don't want to go on that route. They are looking to facilitate things such as a layer one in the new proposal. But actually, they wanted to say, to scale a layer one to do everything isn't quite practical. Let's come up with this way where we can secure and be the underlying infrastructure, the computer, and we can have all these other cores, chains that essentially do these various tasks. And thus, if you have 50 cores right now that has a scalability of, I don't know, 35,000 transactions per minute, looking at the whole ecosystem and what they could all potentially manage, imagine how scalable Polkadot is going to be when it has 500, so 10x what it currently has, to 1,000 cores. The throughput and the scalability, the scale of what will be taking place, and this computer that Polkadot is as a whole will be able to do with these various cores is truly amazing. And we can see the likes of Ethereum and its ecosystem moving to layer twos. Layer twos do more things, and layer twos aren't the same thing as kind of cores and parachains and the whole Polkadot model. But most other blockchains right now are moving to this multi-chain, multi sort of ecosystem because the layer one simply can't scale. Polkadot was light years ahead of the direction most people are now moving in.
So let's think about these individual cores. We've decided, okay, Polkadot has got many of them. What does each one do? Is it really like a CPU core? Well, actually, yeah, it is. It has a number of characteristics, a number of attributes. You can describe it in quite similar terms to a CPU core, because at the end of the day, it is something that does computation. Now, if the only thing these cores could be used for were running parachains pretty much exactly as parachains were running today, then this would be a bit of a dry talk. But it turns out that there's actually lots of other things you can do with a computer that happens to be ubiquitous, global, and available to everybody. One of the things that we can do is we can actually consider running smart contracts directly on cores. Now, this isn't an especially, this isn't going to be delivered tomorrow, but the idea of it, I think, is a very useful one to move the paradigm, move the perspective, so that we can understand how general these things are. They really are quite general. They don't need to be used to secure parachains. Imagine that you have a piece of logic that needed approximately a Geekbench 5 computer of 380, constantly doing compute on it, and sort of brought in and had a state, let's say, of 2.5 megabytes. So basically had 2.5 megabytes of memory to play around with. You could run this on a core, And this allows you, this Geekbench score and this bandwidth is far more substantial than what you'll find in a smart contract chain. And in principle, it probably costs a lot less to do it on Polkadot. And for most sort of alternatives, doing it on Polkadot is way more secure as well. And obviously, you get a lot of added benefits, like the ability to take part in a much wider message passing environment.
Basically, anybody that has any kind of use for computing, if you look at the Web 2 computing market, it is colossal. I mean, it really is. But anybody that has a use case where they can utilize computing, a global decentralized computing system, computer is really how we're choosing to look at it. They're now going to be able potentially to facilitate that via renting. They don't have to rent a core. Cores can actually be split up. And if you can facilitate smart contracts on cores, it means you can facilitate applications. it's very interesting. We've always thought that Polkadot is kind of like an ecosystem of blockchains. It's like an ecosystem of chains. And the last thing that Gavin Wood touched on there was the fact they can all interoperate with one another without the need for bridges in a decentralized, trustless manner, which is absolutely huge. Bridges are still a massive pain point. And this is really one of the huge benefits XCM that Polkadot brings to the party.
All right. So what does it mean? What does it mean for those that are sort of looking at it from a brass tacks point of view? Cores are agile things, right? They're very general, and in principle they don't deal in terms of like fixed jobs. It's not like a core can only have one thing on it indefinitely. They can change what job they're doing just as easily as a CPU in a modern machine can alter what process it's working on right now. If the cores are such agile resources, it only makes sense that the procurement of cores, the procurement of this resource, should be agile as well. And the slot auction model is most certainly not agile. It's designed on the original basis of Polkadot, the original perspective, the original paradigm, long-running single chains. Indeed, it was only some years into the development of Polkadot that parathreads as an idea arose. And even this was only a small portion of the way to the correct, I would say, paradigm, to the paradigm that correctly models, or most closely models, what it is that we have actually built. Now, the problem with the slot auction model and it not being agile is it creates high barriers. It creates high barriers into the Polkadot, into the space of Polkadot, Polka world, whatever you want to call it. These barriers, some of them are merely perceived, but a lot of the time they're actually real barriers. If you have a tinkerer, someone who's, like I used to be and a little bit still am, who's just playing around with some technology, such people, or at least if, placing myself in that particular role, wearing the tinkerer hat, I don't want to be bothered about raising tokens or marketing or finding other people with whom I can. I just want to deploy some code and see if people use it. Kind of like open source approach, right? And by forcing them into this model, I believe we lose a lot of potential collaborators. So I'm going to put forward a possible future, agile Polkadot, if you want to name. We depart from the leases and the slots model. And rather, we accept that Polkadot is this bunch of compute cores. Cores in a ubiquitous computer. Time on these cores, which we might reasonably call core time, although across the industry is perhaps also considered block space, can be sold periodically.
As I'm sure you can tell, I'm a massive fan of the way that Polkadot is hopefully going to be going. When I speak to a lot of people that actually are looking to build businesses on blockchains, they have major issues right now. And one of the major issues that they have is costs. So with Ethereum, for example, is a very obvious example. If you were to build on Ethereum, if you were to build a business on Ethereum, it's almost impossible because you don't know what your costs are going to be. And that problem is the same thing with Polygon. We saw huge jumps in Polygon's fees the other day. One of the beautiful things about Polkadot is actually you can know your costs for a period of time through renting the resources that you're after, essentially. And that is a real game changer from an institutional, or not an institutional, a business point of view. So we're absolutely on board with this. We think generally you're going to see Polkadot move from what is quite a closed off system that involves you having to win auctions in order to be able to build on top of Polkadot, to essentially anyone and everybody to be able to now build on top of Polkadot for massive things like what we see some of the parachains doing, to tiny little applications that we see being built on some of the sort of smart contract platforms, layer ones that we see. And this is all going to happen in an interoperable manner. We are absolutely on board with this. So really, to summarize, we're moving away from this parachain model. Parachain models will still exist in all their glory, but they'll have their own cores, which they already currently have. But cores are going to be a lot more accessible to everybody. And when you think about really right now, Web3 is just waiting for that killer adoption. That killer adoption likely isn't going to come from a developer, in my opinion. It's going to come from an entrepreneur. If you look at Jeff Bezos, for example, and what he did with, this great idea of selling books online, now one of the biggest companies in the world. Someone is likely going to do a similar thing in Web3. There's going to be multiple of them, and they're going to be some of the biggest companies of tomorrow, whether that's file storage, whatever it may be. We are still yet to see. Before I love and leave you guys, we recently submitted a proposal to Polkadot OpenGov so that we can bring you a lot more Polkadot content over the next 6 months. We're going to leave a link to that proposal in the description. If you are a partaker or know how to partake in Polkadot's OpenGov, please do check out the proposal, read it in full. Any feedback is more than welcome, and let us know your thoughts. It's essentially going to enable us to take the time to cover Polkadot week in, week out, to write articles on it, and of course to get lots more great builders on the Polkadot space on the show so that you guys can stay up to date with everything going on as Polkadot is potentially embarking on a new and exciting journey. On that note, I'm going to love and leave you. If you've enjoyed this content, a like is appreciated, so is a comment, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thanks for watching, guys. Catch you in the next.